Good morning, Wilshire Presbyterian Church, on this last Sunday of 2020. As New Year's Eve is drawing near, as 2021 is coming closer, we all tend to reflect back on this year, to think about all that has happened this year and where it has taken us and brought us to this place in December 2020. During this Advent season, I was in a committee meeting one night, and my best friend serves on this committee too. And it was her turn to do a devotion. That's how we opened the meeting. And she surprised us all by doing a devotion from a children's book. Now, this is a serious committee. Yet her children's book and the simple message that came with it was so profound and touched me deeply that for the rest of December I kept on reflecting on her words. And so I phoned her and I asked, the last Sunday of the month, can I share that message with my congregation? Can I borrow your book? And she said yes, and so I have the book. And it's called Home by Another Way. And it is by one of my favorite, actually, female theologians, Barbara Brown Taylor. I think I've read all her books. She, before she retired, was an Episcopalian priest, and she just has this beautiful understanding of the gospel. Now, don't be deterred from listening to the story if you're older than 10, because this is a serious theologian that wrote this children's book. And so this is actually a book for old and young. You'll see when I read it. It is about finding a new way home. When you go somewhere, I don't know, maybe some strange place, you have a meeting and you've never been there, the only way you're going to get there is to use your GPS on your cell phone. And you get to your destination, maybe it was a wedding, a meeting, whatever, and the meeting is over and now you have to go home. You know what my GPS does to me every single time? I'm 5 minutes down the I-10 or 405 or 101, and then it suddenly says, well, there is a slowdown in 5 minutes. We will reroute your route. Say yes or no. And I never are able to say no in time, because I hate going on a detour, because that GPS is going to take me on surface streets in neighborhoods I've never been in my life. And I always get this angst of panic when I'm in the surface streets, and I go, if my GPS goes down right now, my cell phone, I would have no idea how to get home. I don't know where I am. It's really unsettling for me because, I'm a creature of habit. I like to just take the freeway and know how to get home. And suddenly I'm forced to take a total different route that I did not foresee. And then once the first angst is over, I can look around and go, never seen this part of LA. Interesting. Probably will never see it again, but this is interesting. And it's sort of what happened to the wise men as they found their way back from visiting Herod before they found Jesus. And this is sort of what happened to us this year in 2020. We were forced to take many detours. Just when we think we figured it out in the last 10 months, then circumstances change again. We were forced to give up so many things we used to do, like how we do Thanksgiving and how we do Christmas and how we do Easter, how we go to work, how our kids go to school. Everything changed. How we go about our daily lives. This has been a rerouting of our journey the past 2020 non-stop. It was like we were finding ourselves on surface streets the whole time, and just you think, okay, we'll find our way back to the freeway. The GPS goes, oh no, I'm just going to put you further into this maze of surface streets. That was 2020 for us. We had to find a new way home through all of this. And it is what the story of the wise men is. They had to find a new way home to make sure that Herod doesn't find the baby Jesus. So let's listen to the story. Home by Another Way, a Christmas story by Barbara Brown Taylor. We start by reading from Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 to 2. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." Once upon a time, there were 3 wise men who were all sitting in their own countries, minding their own business, when a bright star lodged in the right eye of each of them. The star was so bright that none of them could tell whether it was burning in the sky or in their own imaginations. But they were wise enough to know it did not matter that much at all. The point was, something beyond them was calling them, and it was a tug they have been waiting for all their lives. Each in his own country had tried books, tried magic, tried astrology. One had lived on nothing but dried herbs boiled in water. Another had spent his entire fortune learning how to read and write in an ancient language. The third had learned to walk on hot coals, though it did nothing for him beyond the great sense of relief he felt at the end. Despite their best efforts, all 3 of them still felt that something was missing. They were glad for a reason to get out of town, which was clearly where the star was calling them. Out, away from everything they knew how to manage and survive, out from under the reputations they had built for themselves, the high expectations, and the disappointing returns. And so they set out, one by one, each believing that he was the only one with a star in his eyes, until they all ran into one another on the road to Jerusalem. From a distance, each thought the other to be a mirage at first, a twinkling reflection made of vapor and heat. But as they drew near to one another, they saw the star they had in common, like a tattoo or a secret handshake, something that made them brothers before they spoke. They all believed that the star was leading them to Jerusalem. This made perfect sense, because they had every reason to believe that they were on their way to meet a king. They had no trouble gaining entrance to the palace. They looked rich, and that was enough to get them a royal audience. But the king they met was something of a disappointment. He was lumpy and rumpled, and he had a terrible breath, and his skin looked a funny orange color and sickly, as if his bile had gotten the best of him. The guards on either side of him shook in fear of their king, so much that their spears rattled against their shields. Without even comparing notes, the wise men knew he was not the person they were looking for. "Do you know of any other kings in the general area?" they asked him. He has been picking at his fingernails until then, letting them know how bored he was. But their question got his attention. He looked right at them for the first time. That's when he saw the star in each of their eyes. His own eyes grew perfectly round, like the eyes of a snake. The king asked the wise men if they could please excuse him for a moment. Then he stepped into his private chapel to confer with his clergy. They whipped out their old reference books, which smelled of mold, and told the king what he wanted to know. Yes, they said, there was something in the book of Micah about a new ruler for Israel, but nothing to get excited about. It was short, and it had been there for a long time. It was unlikely that the men in the other room were fulfilling that prophecy. But sure, why not? Send the wise men to Bethlehem to check it out. to save the king a little money instead of doing his own research. So that was what the king did. He goggled, he combed out his hair, and went back to tell the wise men they should go to Bethlehem at once, with his blessing, on one condition, that they would come back and tell him who his successor was, so that he could in turn, send flowers to the new king. His breath smelled like pine sol when he said it, which made the wise men feel queasy. They knew something was not right, but once they were back out in the night air, they could see the star in the sky again, and it set their minds at rest. They followed it right to the doorway of a one-room house in Bethlehem. It was a perfectly nice place, modest but well built, though not the kind of place where they had expected to find a king. A dog was sniffling on the woodpile under the eaves in hope of a mouse. Someone was practicing the lute next door, going over the same notes again and again. The smell of dinner was in the air. Wheat cakes cooked on a griddle greased with sheep's fat, lentils with lots of garlic, and rice. The place looked so simple, they might never have chosen it themselves. But since the star had chosen it for them, they knocked. When the door opened, the couple standing behind it almost died of fright. Not that the wise men noticed. With their arms full of gifts, they crowded into the small space, bumping their turbans on the rafters and snagging their ropes on the rough furniture. All they could see was the baby, who was not afraid, and whose right eye shone with the same star they had seen before they left home. It was him then, whoever he was. They did not have a clue, but they knew what to do. They got onto their knees and bowed their heads. Then they gave him the things they had brought for him: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. All the wrong things they could see now, things he had no use for. They should have brought him goat's milk and a warm blanket and something shiny to hang over a crib. But now, how could they have guessed? The child's parents were gracious. They thanked the strangers for their expensive gifts and held them up for the baby to see. Then, to the wise men's complete surprise, the child's mother picked him up and handed him around so that each of them held that damp, soft, living weight in their arms. When they were finished admiring him, she took her baby back, nursed him, and put him to bed. Then, before the light coming through the window of the house had entirely gone out, the three wise men fell asleep right where they sat. In the morning, when they woke up, the wise men could not find their stars anywhere. They searched each other's eyes, but the stars were gone. Frantically, they looked in all the corners and under the chairs. The baby's mother even shook out his blankets, but still no stars. Soon the wise men calmed down and said, "Never mind. We do not seem to need them anymore. They have found what they were looking for, something they could not lose. As much as they hated to, they added, they had better be on their way." They would not be going back through Jerusalem as they said. All three of them had woken from the same identical dream, warning them to stay clear of the city. If anyone in Jerusalem knew anything at all, they would have been here instead of there. Besides, none of the wise men's old maps worked anymore. They would have to find a new way home. So the wise men picked up their packs, which were lighter than before. Then they lined up in front of the baby to thank him for the gifts he had given them. "What in the world are you talking about?" the baby's mother said, laughing. "For the scent and the weight and the skin of a baby," said the first wise man, who had no interest in living on herbs anymore. "For this home and the love here," said the second wise man, who could not remember how to say it in an ancient language. "For a really great story," said the third wise man, who thought that telling it might do a lot more to him than walking on hot coals. Then the wise men walked outside, stretched, kissed the baby goodbye, and went home by another way. The end. Sometimes the most valuable gifts are the most unexpected. See, what I told you, it's not really just a book for kids. It speaks to us as adults. And I love that about the Gospel of Matthew, because what Matthew does, it puts the story of Jesus' birth like it is in the real world, where there's toils and troubles and trials and detours and things get rerouted and life gets messy. And it's not just the wise men who had to find a new way home. When Herod found out what happened and that the wise men, the Magi, did not return to him, he still wanted to get rid of Jesus, but he didn't know where he was. And so if you read the rest of the gospel story, you will find out what Herod did is decide to just kill everybody in the town of Bethlehem that is a boy and younger than 2 years old. We call that the slaughter of the innocents, the dark side of Christmas, how this real world actually works. But fortunately, Joseph was warned in a dream, and he and Mary fled with Jesus in the middle of the night to Egypt. That was not part of their plans for the next life year that they were looking forward to. It was totally derailed. They had to reroute. And so now they found themselves in Egypt, where it's a strange country, strange people, strange language, strange customs. And they had to adapt to that. They had to find their way home there too. And once news came a few years later that Herod died, they knew it was safe to bring Jesus back to Israel. But they could not return to Bethlehem because Herod's son was still on the throne. And as long as one of Herod's kids was on the throne, Jesus would be a threat to them. And so Mary and Joseph decided to find another way home back to Israel. They went to a little town in Galilee called Nazareth, and that became the place Jesus grew up. Just as Mary and Joseph, just as the wise men had to reroute, to adjust, so do we this 2020. One of my favorite early feminist theologians is Nellie Martin, and she wrote wonderful books about the detours that we face in life in our journey of faith. And she called those journeys the journey home, the process of coming to God. It is in that disruption, in that detours, that we not only find out what is important for us in life, that we don't just only find out what is essential. It's not only a journey back to our authentic self, it is also a journey back to God. This was a year of doing things different. There was no way you could do with things you used to do it. That just went out the window. And I'm sure as it was true for all the things in your life, it was also true for your faith. So I hope that as we stand here at the end of 2020, that you have found a new way to experience Christ in your life, that you have found a new way to know God in your life, that you have at last come home to God by a different way. May you have a blessed 2021.